All right, well, if anybody is joining us for the first time tonight, welcome. Glad you're here. For those of you who are returning after the first couple of sessions, congratulations. You have made it to the last one. This is talking with children about sex. So whether it is children 3-4 years old, preschoolers, teenagers, or in some cases, adult children who may be coming and asking advice or needing to process what's going on in their world. Whatever age the children are, hopefully what we talk about tonight will give you some insight and maybe encouragement to have healthy conversations. As I've mentioned before, our tagline with Ultimate Escape is you can learn a lot about sex from a fill in the blank. We're going to learn about sex from a sports car here in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, 2016 Barna survey, and if I remember, I think this is the one that was commissioned by, the name just went blank, Josh McDowell. His ministry commissioned Barna to do a survey around pornography use, and this is one of the stats that they uncovered. A third of females and over 2/3 of males ages 13 to 24. Now that's a wide age spectrum. I would love to know a little bit more detail of how they broke that down. Seek out pornography at least once a month because if it's that many 13-year-olds, that paints one picture. If it's primarily, that's really more in the 20-year-old plus, that would be a different picture. But I come back to anecdotal evidence. I think that's a way under statistic, meaning I think the percent is way higher than that right there. And people who work with, if you ask people who are in youth ministry, who are teachers in middle school and high schools, and especially if you expand that definition of pornography to include sexting, like self-produced porn, then I think you're in a way higher category because it is just an almost universal thing. By the time kids are middle school and high school, the kids are producing their own porn and distributing their own porn. We'll talk about a little bit more about that later on. So if we're looking at steps toward healthy, okay, in the last session we talked about some issues in our culture that make for confusion, like the misperceptions, misinformation, distorted images about sexuality. There's plenty of evidence that shines light on how unhealthy sex is in our modern culture. If we wanted to start making steps toward healthy, what does that look like? One of my suggestions would be you begin early and be consistent. And that's what's going to take us into what can you learn about sex from a sports car. So let me power up my miniature sports car here. The idea is for this car to make it right down the aisle. I want it to go right center aisle and just right to those doors back there. Matter of fact, if somebody would be willing to prop one of those doors open, I'm going to shoot to just send the sports car right out the door. All right, there we go. So we've got it pointed in the right direction. It is powered on. And I'm just going to send it straight down the aisle right there to Matthew. And here we go. Well, that didn't work very well. If you're not able to see the car on the floor, it veered off to the left pretty quickly and did not make it to its intended destination. So we're going to have to try this differently because obviously just pointing it in, I hope you guys are following with where I'm going with this. Just pointing it in the right direction and then sending it off it is obviously not going to work. So this time, when it starts to get off course, we're going to have a course correction and see if that works a little better. Okay. Now it doesn't look incredibly straight. This may not be the prettiest trip out the back door, but it did make it right out the back door where I expected it would. Okay. And now we're going to try to bring it right back down the front. Okay, oops. And it came to a stop right under my father-in-law, so we'll just leave it right there. Al, if you don't mind just switch underneath that and power it off, and we'll let it come to rest. Okay, that time it made it where we wanted it to go. Again, it wasn't a straight shot. It didn't look all that impressive, but it did make it where we wanted it to go. So the idea is, instead of just having the talk, which we dread having it, our kids are totally uncomfortable in it, we might survive it, but it was traumatic for everybody involved. Okay, instead of that model, let's look at brief conversations, starting early and fairly often, but emphasis on brief. So I mentioned before in our last session, 2 books by Dr. Jim Burns. Jim Burns is director of Homeword, Homeword, Homeword Ministries. They have a radio show that's been on for years that is also a podcast format. But in that book, God Made Your Body, in the introduction of that book, he says it's important to introduce children to the foundational theme that God created their body and it's special. You begin laying out for them a healthy view of their body and the very basics of sexuality. He goes on to say in that introduction, you'll be establishing the trust that they can come to you when they're older and talk about these issues. Again, to me, if we can start early, and by early, ages 3 to 4, because most of us concrete memories might go back to 3, just spotty, but most of our memories as far as solid memories will be more of like 6 plus. So if we're starting at age 3 or 4, that means in their memory as they get older, it will always have been just normal to have conversations with mom and dad that my parents are the sex educators in our family. And it's normal to ask them questions, and hopefully we can lay a foundation where we can have healthy conversations minus a lot of emotional baggage, and just we talk. What do we talk about? Well, ages 3 to 5, God made you. So we're laying out a Christian worldview. You didn't just, we didn't go to Walmart and buy you. You didn't come out from under a rock. You didn't evolve from primordial soup. Okay, God made you, and He made your body. God made every part of your body. There's no bad part of your body. There are private parts, and there are parts that it's okay for everybody to see. Here are some examples of some private parts. Boys and girls are different. Boys have a penis. Girls have a vagina. Now, that's not the only difference between boys and girls, but that is a pretty important difference between boys and girls. And we're just basically giving them information that satisfies curiosity and helps them feel good about their body, comfortable in their own skin. Here is appropriate touch. It's okay for somebody to do this if that's okay with you. Like, it's okay for Aunt so-and-so to give you a hug when she sees you if you want a hug from Aunt so-and-so. But if you don't want her to hug you, we will tell Aunt so-and-so you're not comfortable with a hug, and we'll ask her not to give you a hug, because what we're teaching you is you have the right to be in charge of your body. Just because it might be awkward doesn't mean we force you into a situation that you're not comfortable with, because if we prime our children to tolerate stuff they're not comfortable with, we have just set them up to be hurt the older that they get. So we teach them that they have a level of responsibility or authority over their own body. It's okay for a doctor to see a private part if there's something wrong with that part of your body, or if we need to go in and have a doctor give you a checkup. But it's not okay if a babysitter asks to see that part of your body, and if they do, here's what you can do. As soon as you are able to, tell us what happened. Because they may not be able to do that in that moment. It's a babysitter, which by definition is you probably are not there. But when you get home or the next day, hopefully they're in a position and they can tell you what happened. And by giving them permission to talk about it, it is more likely that they will disclose. It doesn't guarantee that they will. We can have healthy conversations with our kids, and that doesn't guarantee that they're going to navigate things well, but it's more likely that they're going to navigate things, and they'll be better equipped to navigate things. So again, feel good about themselves, feel good about their body, and satisfy curiosity that they have. Don't want to share more information than they're ready for, and don't want to overshare if they ask a question, but basically try to just, if they have a blank and they're looking to fill that in, try to fill that blank in. Ages 6 to 9, obviously they're a little older, and for most children this age, they're around a peer group in a school setting. Again, whether that's public school, private school, or like a homeschool co-op, they're around other kids, and who knows what other kids have been exposed to. My default is always other kids have seen things that they're likely to be sharing or talking about with my children, even if they don't know better. Like a 6-year-old may not know that the video that their older brother showed them is inappropriate. They just know their brother showed them a video and it seems silly. And so they're showing it to another 6-year-old. That's the extent of what they know about it. Now, what's actually going on can be pretty impactful and not in a good way, but it's not the 6-year-old's fault. They're 6. They are doing what 6-year-olds do. They share something funny that they saw or that to them looks funny. And so recognizing that even though we may try to keep a pretty healthy, secure environment, doesn't mean that the kids that our children are interacting with aren't bringing stuff into the mix. Basics of sexuality. Again, as a 6-year-old, I don't need a lot of gory information about sex, but I do need to have a basic understanding or definition of what it is, because other kids at school, or my experience talking with parents, other children in preschool, are talking about sex. Some kids think they have had sex, and some of them have. So we need to know what it is when people say the word, because if a child doesn't know what it is, well, it's real easy for an 8-year-old to just type in sex in Google, and they're going to be flooded with information, not in a good way. So if we can satisfy the curiosity, then they're not as likely to then go try to find things on their own. Basics of sexuality: where do babies come from? Here's where they come from, and here's where a stork does not bring a child. They don't just magically appear. Here's where babies come from. Basic anatomy. Again, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina, and there's more to the body than just genitals. God's part in the family from the time you're conceived to the time you're born, as you grow up, and eventually as you die and go to be with Jesus. Here's how life goes. Here's how a family works. As you get older, if you meet somebody you want to get married to, and then you guys might have children, which would be our grandchildren, we're giving them basically a vision for what life can look like in the future and satisfy curiosity. By the end of elementary school, the beginning of middle school, basically they're going to need to know pretty much all the stuff, because they're going to be immersed in a culture that is sharing all the stuff with them. A concept of purity. What is the idea of purity? Not just about sex. What does it look like to be pure of mind? What does it look like to keep my body pure? Our sexuality is a part of that. Again, remember session 1, the theology of sex. 1 Thessalonians, it's God's will that you should be sanctified, avoid sexual immorality, but there's more to it than that. Living a holy life involves our sexuality, but a lot more than just our sexuality. So again, I don't want to overemphasize and make it's only about sex, but our sexuality is a part of that. Inform about changes in puberty, and I would add before they happen. That is so important. What was the video clip? Young Sheldon, I think. The video clip we saw just the other night. And if you're familiar with the TV show Young Sheldon, his twin sister Missy begins her period on a road trip for a baseball game. Her dad is driving the truck, and she comes out and says, "It started." And it's kind of humorous in the way that they portray that, the awkwardness of that. But that's probably pretty consistent with what a lot of people's experience is. I've talked to several adult women who describe nobody told them anything about it. I had a teenage client that nobody talked to her about having a menstrual cycle, and for the first year of her having a cycle, no parent provided anything for her. An older sibling ended up getting the hygiene products that she needed. That's child abuse, to not equip a child for what their body is going through. So they need to know in advance, and there are some things that are pretty standard. Hey, boys, you're going to get hair where hair hasn't grown before. Under your arms, genital area, kind of all over, for some, all over your body. You're just, some people turn out to be pretty hairy guys, and others don't. And it's not a right or wrong. It's not a one guy is a real man and the other is, you have no control over it, and your body is going to do whatever it's going to do. That's just normal. And to let them know that it's okay if this happened, it's okay if it doesn't. How their body looks does not determine whether they're a real man or not. There are some things that just aren't all that public knowledge. An example. It's normal for guys to get a hard knot under one or both nipples as their body is going through puberty. It may last 6 months, a year, and eventually it goes away. But it's just a normal part of the body development. I would say most guys don't know that. Griffin, our youngest, one of the things that I've mentioned to him, by the way, just, as your body goes, this is one of the things that happened. Griffin was probably, 14 or 15. And he came home one day and he said, hey, guess what? So-and-so, called one of his good buddies' names. Guess what so-and-so told me? What did he? He thought he had cancer. He thought he was going to die. He said he had a lump under one of his nipples. He said, and Griffin said, and I told him, my dad told me about that. That's just normal. His buddy's like, I thought I was going to die of cancer. Again, it makes a difference when you know what to expect. Because if you don't know what to expect, I heard somebody recently was talking about, spend 2 or 3 hours on WebMD or, Mayo Clinic site, and all of a sudden, you got this dreaded tropical illness. No, it might just be a normal thing. You just didn't know it was normal. So let our kids know, here's what to expect, but be ahead of the curve on that. And let them know what's going to happen before they're there and it's happening. Sex is a gift from God. And obedience to God in this area of our life is important. Again, we're not trying to be alarmist. We're not trying to, control them or manipulate them by fear or guilt. Or if you do this, God's going to, send you to hell. Hopefully, we're not trying to parent with that kind of a motivation. But we're setting a goal, putting the target out there, and trying to encourage them in heading that direction. As I mentioned, we need to address all areas in this stage of development. So by the time they're walking into that middle school, they're pretty well armed with accurate information. Talk about relationships. Why do people get into romantic or boyfriend-girlfriend relationships? What boundaries do you guys as a family, what are the things that they can expect are okay, and where do you try to guide them? They need to know what porn is. Please do not show them porn and say this is what porn is. But they need to have, an operational definition. Even as a 6 or 7-year-old, we can give pornography is a picture or a movie of somebody in a sexual way, or showing sexual parts or private parts of their body. So again, the words we use as a 6-year-old need to be understandable for a 6-year-old, but we give them a definition. And then they might ask, why would people do that? And we try to give them a easy to understand definition or reason. Why would somebody do that? Peer pressure, that we talk about, how do you handle peer pressure? Because if you're a guy and another guy shows you porn and you act like you're not interested, you don't want to see that, there's pretty quickly likely to be a response and some names thrown at you because you're not into that, or what's that? That must mean you're gay. That would be a pretty standard defensive response if somebody is showing a porn video and another person doesn't want to see that. So how do we handle that? Does it really mean that? If you try to make a good choice and keep your eyes away from that, how would you respond to what somebody would say, or teasing or bullying about that? What is modesty? What responsibility do you have, whether you're a male or a female? What are your responsibilities to keep yourself dressed appropriately? In your family, how do you basically loosely define that? What are standards of modesty? Because that varies between individuals and families. It would be great if, hey, God put a book, chapter, and verse and said, this is what modesty is. He didn't. I think there's some bigger issues in that, other than what parts of your body can be shown and how tight can stuff be and still be mine. There's some bigger issues to talk through, like do I use my sexuality to get attention? Is that a wise thing to do? Is that a selfish thing to do? Is it okay to flirt? Are there times when flirting might hurt somebody else? If I'm giving off a signal that but I'm not really interested in that person, is my flirting more of a selfish thing? Like I'm doing that to feel good about me, but I'm not really paying attention to how it might make somebody else feel. Those are conversations to have. Not sermons to give, just conversations to have. And certainly by the time they're 12, 13, it may be more of asking questions just to understand where their mind is at and what their thoughts are. And then based on what their thoughts are, might it be helpful to have some coaching or trying to shape those thoughts? Or are their thoughts pretty well grounded? But again, by that point, hopefully we're looking more as a parent, I'm a coach, and just one voice of many voices in the life of my child, as opposed to I'm trying to dictate and make my child behave or think what I think they should think. So arm them to navigate the sexual culture that they're living in, that they didn't pick. Okay, none of our kids chose to grow up in a world that just bombards them with sexuality. But that's the world they live in, and so they need to be equipped how to navigate it. So we begin early, be consistent. Share, emphasis on share accurate information about sexuality. Don't withhold it. There's another speaker on sexuality named Mary Flo Ridley, and she has this analogy. I love the word picture. She says, or in one of her presentations, she talks about she and her husband originally thought that their children's minds were like a sponge that would absorb information about sex, and their job as parents was to be the guardian and protector of the sponge. We don't want to let any information contaminate the mind of our child. She said, but we rethought that, and instead of trying to be the guardians and keep everything out, we decided we want to be the ones who introduce information, but we want to introduce truth. And so looking at their mind as a sponge, if they pour the water, kind of drip, 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 and fill that sponge with accurate information, then the sponge becomes saturated with truth, so that when misinformation comes in, it basically hits the sponge and then just sheds off because the sponge is already saturated. She said that we've adopted that perspective, and I love that word picture. Instead of trying to keep everything away, let's just provide accurate information. Provide safe, nurturing touch and affection. When people are starved for touch, for nurturing, for affection, for attention, we'll take it from anywhere we can. And that's a very biblical concept. I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying it's a biblical concept. The person who is full loathes honey, but to the hungry, even what is bitter tastes sweet. Okay, again, scriptural concept. When I'm full, even something that tastes good, I don't want it. Chocolate milk, whew, man, I've had enough. No more, thank you. I love chocolate milk, but no more right now. But if I'm starving, even what I know isn't good, I'll take it in because I'm starved for it. So dads, provide nurturing, affection, appropriate touch to those little girls from the day they're born, and you keep doing it even once they hit puberty and their bodies become the bodies of young women and not little girls. We don't shy away from giving affection just because they are now young women. Again, I've had those conversations with adult women who, as they hit puberty, their dads suddenly stopped giving them any affection. They stopped hugging them. Now, trying to be, giving the best motive possible. Okay, it may be that a dad wanted to not do anything inappropriate, or the dad was uncomfortable because of his own baggage with giving hugs to this little girl who is now not a little girl, but a young woman. But the message that sent, again, probably not the message Dad meant to send, but the message the little girl got from that is, I've done something wrong. My dad doesn't like me. There's something wrong with me. Which there's a whole world of guys who are willing to provide, but not safe affection. They're willing to provide affection and touch. And so if we're not providing that in healthy ways, our kids are definitely going to be looking for that, and they will settle for anything that they can get, healthy or not. And same thing, moms with sons. Sons need to grow up knowing that mom is there to give them a hug. And even in those awkward years when it's like, don't hug me, just know that the heart of the little boy inside still longs for affection from mom. Now, that's a navigate, because we don't want to blow past somebody's I don't want to hug right now. And at the same time, we don't necessarily need to give in to, I'm a tough guy, I don't need a hug. I really do. I really want one, but I'm going to say I don't. It's hard to navigate. Just my encouragement is be aware that sometimes you might have to go a little gently pushing on that door to figure out what do they actually want right now and what do they need right now, but not trying to blow past boundaries that they're trying to set. Be a sexually healthy parent. Jesus said there's a reason why you take that great big log out of your own eye. And it's so that you can see clearly how to remove the speck in your brother's eye. Okay, let's translate that spiritual principle. There's a reason why I deal with my own sexual stuff first, so that I can help my children navigate all the sexual stuff that they need to navigate. But if I've got all this stuff in my background and I haven't dealt with it, it's likely to bleed out and contaminate my ability as a parent. An example of that. Somewhere before April of 2002, I don't know if it was a month before or 2 years, I don't know, but somewhere before April 2002, our youngest, Griffin, was with me in Walmart. We're at the checkout line. There's a magazine with a female on the front, and Griffin says, "Do you think she's pretty?" Now, Griffin would have been, I don't know, maybe 3. I mean, in the ballpark of a 3-year-old at the time. "Do you think she's pretty?" I'm flustered. That question just triggered all the hide, feel shameful. I'm not supposed to think anybody but Holly is attractive. I'm not supposed to let anybody know that I think somebody is pretty. I mean, that goes back to 5, 6, 7 years old and Steve. It totally caught me off guard. And so I don't think I even responded in like words. I think it was just literally kind of like that. Well, man, that sent a message to a 3-year-old. You're not supposed to talk about whether somebody's pretty. You're not supposed to talk about that kind of stuff. Not the message I wanted to send, but my background contaminated a moment that could have been a really healthy, teachable moment. You know what, Griffin? I do. She's a really pretty lady. And there's a Snickers bar. You want to grab it? I mean, just that quick of a transition. I mean, not like I'm trying to divert. It's just a matter of fact. That's an easy question. Here's the answer to your question. We move right along.
Well, a lot of times, the reason that parents can't talk to their kids in a healthy manner is because they haven't, frankly, dealt with their own sexuality. You know what the number one question is that parents ask me at seminars? Well, if I've been sexually active, or if I was sexually active when I was young, do I tell my kids? And there's kind of a debate on that, frankly. Some people would say, absolutely not, don't tell your kids. I tend to go the other way and say, you know what, in a right moment, I wouldn't give every gory detail, but I would say the reason I'm passionate about this is because there was some pain in my life because I made some improper decisions. Nevertheless, whatever the issue is with your sexuality, when we talk to our kids about sexuality, it brings up all kinds of things within our own life. So many times, because of our past, because of past experiences, or because of the way we were brought up, we have trouble dealing with talking about sexuality because we really haven't built that theology of sexuality in our own life. So what I want to say to you today is that if you are struggling with your own sexuality, for whatever reason, get help. There is help. The Bible says that the man or woman who seeks counsel will get wisdom. The man or woman who does not seek counsel will not get the wisdom. Today, we have great books and resources that can help you through your own sexuality, and in doing that, you can pass a legacy of healthy sexuality onto your children.
This is Jim Burns, author of the 2 books, The God Made Your Body and How God Makes Babies. Really appreciate his focus there. If there's something that you as a parent need to work through, okay, take a step back before I try to navigate my child through this. Let me do my own navigation. And then I come out in a spot where I'm likely to do a much better job and not let my own baggage contaminate my kids' view of sexuality. Recognize that your child might be struggling with something related to sex. Just because you don't know that they are doesn't mean they're not. We lived in White Bluff, Charlotte, with Alan Marsh on their farm back 06 to 09. In 07, my office was in downtown Nashville. Got in the car, jumped on I-40, and it was a standstill. So I turned on the AM radio, listened for the traffic report. About a half mile down the road, probably 30 minutes later, I hear the guy on the radio, we're getting questions about I-40 headed west, and there's no traffic problem on I-40 headed west. I'm sitting on I-40 headed west, and there is most definitely a traffic problem. And in a little bit, I get to the top of the hill, and I can see this billow of smoke. There's a car just blazing on the shoulder on I-40, and that's traffic just crawling. Just because the guy on the radio says there's no problem doesn't mean that there's not a problem. And so I'm not saying that every child is struggling with a deep, dark sexual issue, but I'm saying recognize that just because you don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think if we can just keep that in mind, it helps us navigate through things that may be coming up. Punishment is not a solution. Punishment won't fix anything. So your 13-year-old is looking at porn on his cell phone, and you take the cell phone away for 2 weeks, and you threaten him and say, if you ever do that again, I'm going to take it away for a month, or I'm going to take it away for a year. That's not going to stop him from looking at porn. Threat of punishment doesn't fix the issue. Now, I'm not saying punishment is never a part of effective discipline. I'm just saying be aware that punishing is not going to stop a sexual behavior. There's way more going on than just the surface level behavior. And so we need to figure out what's driving that behavior. Again, remember the noodles, that I'm getting hit in the head back here. That's what drives the entire cycle. If we want to stop the acting out behavior, we got to deal with these noodles that are hitting me in the head back here. Because just I'm not going to drink any more chocolate milk, only lasts for a little while. You want a chocolate milk right now, by the way? I'll ask you tomorrow. If you don't have an open or a safe relationship with your child, you're not likely to be effective in this area. Meaning, if you can't have a conversation about a bad test score, if you can't have a conversation about missing homework, if you can't just have a conversation of how's your day going without it turning into a knockdown, drag out, blow up, there's no way you're going to address this topic in a healthy way. So sometimes I have to take a step back and say, whoa, before I can engage conversations about this, we got to deal with our relationship. Let's figure out how to have a healthy relationship. Might need to get some help in how to have a decent relationship. What's getting in the way of this? I'm just saying sometimes we need to take a step back and deal with first things first so that we can take a weightier matter and be successful with that one. Can learn a lot about sex from a can of Pringles. Anybody here like potato chips? Okay, that's all I can go up. You are welcome to the, now I'm not asking you to eat the whole thing. I'm just asking you to try one, see if they're good. Tell us what you think about your can of Pringles. Okay, I see a look on your face and you're holding up what looks like a little chocolate cookie. Okay, but the can says Pringles. And there's so I hear some energy. Yeah, I definitely hear some energy going on right now. So, how are you feeling right now? I'm disappointed because I thought it was Pringles. the can says Pringles. It has a picture of a potato chip, but you opened it up and it's not a Pringle inside. Here's what happened. The little Oreo cookies, they found out that America's #1 selling snack is potato chips. The little Oreo cookies were afraid they would be left alone and nobody would want them. So they jumped into the Pringles can and presented themselves as Pringles so that somebody would take them home. They misrepresented themselves out of fear of rejection. I'm just saying we all do that. I don't care what age you are, we all do that on some level. We leave parts out. We present an image that we think people will approve of, and our kids do this exponentially more than generally older adults do because they're trying to fit in, and so they present a particular self in school and a different self on this sports team and a different self at church and a different self at home. I'm just saying that's pretty typical. And so if there's anything going on from a sexual struggle standpoint, I don't know what I am. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. I can't stop looking at porn. I sent a picture of myself to this guy and now I'm afraid that everybody at school is going to see it. If we don't feel safe sharing that information because we feel like we're going to get a lecture or going to get yelled at or going to get punished, we're made to feel worse than we already do, then we're not likely to share it. I'm just saying, keep that in mind because that's a pretty typical thing. If your child doesn't feel safe, they're likely to hide something that's going on, especially if they feel guilty, like it was their fault, they did something wrong. So try to avoid comments that discourage disclosure. Be proactive with comments that encourage kids to talk. If you're walking through Walmart and you see what appears to be a pregnant teenage girl, you don't make some unkind, judgmental comment. Because if you do, and your daughter hears that, it gets filed away as, well, if I ever get pregnant, I know not to tell whoever, mom, dad, whoever it is, grandma, grandpa, because I know what they're going to think about me. And so try to make a habit of making comments that let your child know that you're a safe person, that you're open to hearing if they're struggling with something or if they've done something. It doesn't matter what they've done, that you want to be somebody who can help them figure out how to deal with it. Not you're going to be a person who's going to jump down their throat or punish them so that they never do that again. Which means you need to actively commit to responding in a supportive way. If you can paint a picture of what they can expect, they're at least more likely to come and talk to you. It doesn't guarantee, I mentioned that before, no matter how good of a job we do, it doesn't guarantee anything, but at least it stacks the deck a little bit more in our favor. If my child has grown up with a history of me making comments that let them know that they're safe and that I care about them, and no matter what happens, we're going to figure out a way to help them through it. That not everything, I have a person who used this phrase over and over, not everything has to be basically confronted and punished. We don't have to always assign blame, and then punish the behavior, and then we're done. A lot of times, punishment doesn't even need to be in the picture. I'm not saying it never needs to be. I'm just saying rebuke, exhort, encourage. There are more tools in the toolbox than just you did wrong, now I'm going to punish you so that you don't do it again. If abuse is disclosed, like if your child, whether they're 5 years old or 16 years old, if your child shares with you or your grandchild shares with you, somebody did this, here are some things not to do. Don't press for details. The brain does not store trauma in the way it stores normal information. If I said, what did you have for breakfast today? Your brain is going to open up a file drawer of today, and breakfast, and you open up that file and it might say bacon and eggs and toast, or it might say nothing, or a protein smoothie, or whatever you had for breakfast. It's a piece of factual information your brain stores. Trauma is more of stuff got dumped into a blender and turned on, and pieces and parts of it are just kind of all over everywhere. And so in my memory, it may seem like this event happened and this event happened and it was all in the same day, but it might actually be 2 months different. And the brain just doesn't have it stored in an accurate way. And it's not because somebody did anything wrong, it's just the nature of trauma. We don't store traumatic, it's stored in a different part of the brain. Okay, the hippocampus is the file drawer of just factual knowledge. The amygdala is where emotional memory is stored. And it doesn't work like a file system. Again, it's a blender. So if you press for details, you're likely to make the situation worse for them by pressuring a part of their brain that already can't give you information. And so they may say what they think you want to hear, or they say what they think they remember, but it might not be accurate, and what they remember today might be different than what they remember 2 days later. That's just the nature of trauma. And so don't press for details, just let them share whatever they do have, but we're not looking for things that the brain doesn't have. Don't express disbelief. If there was anything I was going to highlight, underline, set in bold, and put firecrackers around, it would be this one right here. Don't express disbelief. The likelihood that a child is making up a sexual abuse encounter is low. It happens. I'm not saying it never happens, but statistically, it's low. If you don't believe them, I'm not saying that you have no right to not believe them. I'm just saying don't express that to them. Go do your homework. Talk about that with somebody else. Figure out offline over here how you're going to deal with that. But if a child comes to you and says, Uncle so-and-so did this to me, and you say, I don't believe that. Uncle so-and-so is such a great person. He loves kids. He would never do anything. We're re-traumatizing our child over. And we're making it basically, they're certainly never going to disclose if it happens again. If you don't believe it, process that with somebody. But don't say that your child. Was doing an event several years ago. I had a question. This was like 5 different youth groups were doing a weekend event. And so in the Q&A, I just was responding to questions that had been dropped in the question box. The question was, my mom's boyfriend sexually abused me. How do I get his image out of my head? There's the question. Have no idea who in the audience has written it. That's the question. So I respond to the question. Probably about a pretty full, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. Probably a 5 to 10 minute, we did what I think is a reasonable response to the question. At the end of the Q&A, girl comes up and self-identifies as the one who wrote the question. Well, now we got to deal with it because now I know who it is. She's in 6th grade. She had told her mom about it. Her mom slapped her across the face and said, don't you ever say anything like that again. That is 100% about mom. That's about mom. Mom's fear of what the boyfriend may do, mom's fear of not having a place to live. I don't know what, but that's about mom. But it had a disastrous effect on a 6th grade girl. Don't confront the abuser. I'm not saying never. I'm just saying in this moment, this is not the time. That there may be a time to confront the abuser, probably not by like jumping in your pickup truck with your shotgun in the rack and driving to their house and banging on the front door. I don't think there's ever a time to do it that way. But there may be a time you need to confront the abuser. But right now, priority number 1 is the child. We need to be there and supportive and help them navigate through what's going on. Things that we should do. Number 1, validate their courage to tell. Wow, I can only imagine how hard that is for you to talk about. I can only imagine how hurtful that was. Congratulations on being able to talk about it. I'm so glad you were able to tell me. We're just validating, here's the good clinical phrase, we're evaluating the I don't know, whatever the word. When I was a kid, it would be the stewie out of that. I don't know where that phrase came from, but in Ohio, that was a phrase. The validate a lot. Commit to do all you can to keep them safe. Can't overcommit. I can't promise that I'll never let that happen again. That's not in I do not have the ability to do that. And so I don't want to promise something that I can't follow through on. Had a client, 14-year-old boy, his mom told him, whatever it is that has happened, I can handle it. Please tell me. And he did. And she could not handle it. Because what he had done is sexually abused all the other children in the family. It was way more than she could handle. And it's fair that she wasn't able to handle that information. But the problem was she had told him to try to get him to tell, I can handle it, when she couldn't. So again, don't overcommit. But I will do what I can to keep you safe. I'll do what I can to keep you from a situation like that. Sometimes legally you're able to do that. Sometimes legally, especially if it's a custody issue, especially on the front end, you may or may not be able to do certain things. So try to keep your commitment within a reasonable or realistic thing. If abuse is disclosed, my encouragement, get professional help now, not 3 months from now, not a year from now, not we're going to deal with this, but then we don't deal with it and time goes on and it gets further away from the crisis and we never do. Get professional help right now. And I will stand on my soapbox on this one. There are a lot of counselors who say, I work with sexual abuse. But there are very few counselors who actually have any training in sexual abuse. And so take the time to ask the question. I noticed on your website it said, you deal with sexual abuse. Talk to me or tell me about your training. Where did you get that training? And if you hear something like, well, that falls into my scope of practice, or I've been working with that for so and so many years, if that's what you hear, thank you very much for your time, click, and then you make another call and you find somebody else. Because anybody who actually has training, they've invested a lot of time and a lot of dollars in that training, and they will be thrilled to tell you about all their training. And they should be able to tell you, I worked under the supervision of this person who is a specialist in that area. I have attended these training courses on that. I worked at such and such a place that is a treatment facility for sexual. They'll be able to tell you something like that. And if you don't hear them cite the training that they have, then they're probably not very qualified to deal with sexual abuse. This is one of the areas that I specialize in. I've done an enormous amount of training in it. And oftentimes I end up doing cleanup from other counselors who don't have training, but tried to, and again, best of intentions, they just operated in an area that they didn't have any training for. And it's easy to do a lot of damage when you're dealing with the area of sexual abuse, but you don't have training to do it. So when I say get professional help, take the time, do your homework, and find somebody who actually has training. And if you don't know how to do that, contact somebody who's in the field and see if they can give you some direction. I don't know, do you guys have, like as a church, do you have a referral list of, okay, so some churches do that. Some churches will have here are people that we know that have gone to see somebody and they did a good job. But the easiest thing to do, just ask the question, where did you get your training? And if they can't give you training, look elsewhere. If you need help with that, you're certainly welcome to give me a call. I can at least point you in the direction of some people who, in the greater Nashville area, who do have really good training. Reassure your children that nothing is too bad to deal with together. There is nothing that has happened to you. There is nothing you have done. There is nothing that you are struggling with that we can't figure out with some help and figure out what would be helpful or what we need to do. I mentioned the books earlier because there may be some people who weren't in here. Let me just run back through. There we go. Note to self. They're back behind you. Okay. For children ages 3 to 5, God made your body. For children ages 6 to 9, how God makes babies. Again, the beauty is you don't have to come up with anything. You just read the book. Whether you get the books, by giving a donation to Ultimate Escape tonight and grab them off the table, or go home and jump on Amazon and find them and save a couple of bucks. Whether you get these books or a different book that basically accomplishes the same thing, highly recommend. If you are the parent or grandparent of young children, if it is at all possible, have a resource in hand that helps lay the foundation. Because again, if we're having those conversations, if we do that work early on, exponential payoff on the value of doing that. Parent book or grandparent book, Angry Birds, Killer Bees. Those 3 books together are the recommended set for parents of elementary school age and down. The Angry Birds and Killer Bees also is appropriate for parents of teens, and so this 3-book set I would recommend if you're dealing with middle school, high school age group. Hooked, the brain neurochemistry and research on what culture basically says versus what plays out, and statistics of if you live together or have sex before you get married, culture says, how do you know you're compatible if you don't do that? But actual research says that the people with the highest level of sexual satisfaction in marriage are people who didn't have sex until after they got married. One study called it Revenge of the Church Lady. I think it was the Chicago Tribune that published the article, Revenge of the Church Lady. That the highest level of sexual satisfaction was in married couples who had not had sexual partners before they got married. The ink is dry, a theological dive into biblical sexuality, specifically looking at issues around same-sex issues and gender identity issues. I think I mentioned this out there to somebody earlier. Hooked. I'm not a reader. I don't enjoy reading. You got to sit still to read. So I'll listen to a book, but I don't like the act of sitting and reading. I would much rather read when I'm busy doing something. And so when I found Hooked, I took it to the gym, and in between sets, I just read a page or 2. Now, I'm sure for those 3 days, I probably was there at the gym longer than normal. But in 3 days, I had read the entire book, just reading a couple of pages in between sets at the gym. I could count all the books I've read since graduate school, which was 20 years ago. I can count that on one hand. And this is probably the best book that I've read out of 4 books. But it made the list if I was willing to read it. And so again, to me, it's fascinating stuff. And I think if every young person read that book before they started high school, it'd be a different journey through high school. Can somebody give me 7? Okay, we've got probably 15 minutes scheduled. If there are questions, I am very happy to respond or attempt to respond to questions. I also recognize that for a lot of people, they don't want to raise a hand and ask a question with a whole bunch of other people around. And so if you want to text me a question, well, actually, I think Holly probably has my phone right now, but yeah, Holly can read the question. If you want to text, now this is where I would encourage everybody get your phone out. I'm going to give you my phone number. And if everybody types in my number into your phone, or pretend that you are, I don't care if you're just like punching buttons or looking on Instagram, but if you get your phone out right now and pretend like you're entering the number, then at least you have it. And whether you need it tonight to ask a question or 3 weeks from now, you need it because something has come up, you are welcome to the number, and it's on the Ultimate Escape website as well, but it's 214-620-1787. Again, 214-620-1787. And that is Steve Holliday, Ultimate Escape. Holladay, as in Holiday, Tennessee, between here and Jackson. Okay. If there are no questions in the next minute or two, then we'll just be done for the night. There are some recent updates about Ultimate Escape. So if this ministry, I don't think I even mentioned at the beginning basically what I do or what our ministry is about. So the ministry Ultimate Escape exists to help people pursue sexuality in a healthy way. Basically, how do we pursue God's plan for sexuality? And so we do events like this at different churches, usually churches, sometimes other organizations, but predominantly churches. And we do a limited level of counseling. Sometimes that's electronic counseling here, there, and yonder, wherever. There was one week I was counseling with somebody in Hawaii and somebody in Amsterdam, and then several different states, all within a few days period. So sometimes it's counseling out here, there, and yonder, but then we also do a local level of counseling as well. We have an office in downtown Dixon. So if we can be a resource for you at some point, please feel free to just reach out, give me a phone call. I am not good at responding to email. I am pretty quick at responding to a text message or a voice message. Oftentimes I'm not in a spot where I can pick up the phone when it rings, but if you'll leave me a voicemail, I generally will return a call within 24 hours. That once in a while it may take a little longer, but usually within 24 hours I can get a phone call back.
How do I begin to improve my sexuality after being exposed to porn at a young age?
So that is a long journey response that we don't not have time to here are all the mile markers on that, but here would be the main highlights. Need to figure out what's driving the porn use. There's typically a payoff side of the coin and an escape side of the coin, meaning there's something going on I'm trying to get away from. It may be lonely, it may be hurt, it may be sad, it may be guilt, fear, shame. There's something uncomfortable that's creating this anxiety. It can be a memory of something traumatic that happened. It can be guilt over what I've done in the past, but there's usually something that we're numbing out by viewing porn. So there's a numbing or escape side. Figuring out what we're numbing out is a big part of how do I move past it. The other is the payoff side. What am I getting from it? When I'm looking at the porn in that moment, am I feeling powerful? Am I feeling wanted? Am I feeling connected? Am I feeling desired? Am I feeling admired? That there's some payoff. There's a desire of my heart that is getting met, or it feels like it's getting met. It's not actually getting met, but it feels like it's getting met in that moment. So those are the two sides of the coin, the payoff and the escape. Probably have to explore both of those. Is there something in the past that draws me to a particular, what is it that I'm wanting to see? And this is where the genre or what's actually happening in the porn becomes really helpful information. Okay, I'm putting the clinical hat on for a moment, and just because I have no idea who asked this question, but want to respond in a reasonable way. Fantasy is oftentimes the mind's attempt to correct a trauma. And so whatever fantasy thoughts run through my head often drives me to look at a particular content in porn. Is it heterosexual, sexual intercourse being depicted? Is it a different behavior? Does it involve male? Does it involve female? There are so many possibilities in the content of porn. Here's the double-edged sword. That is extremely helpful information to have. But it is also, for many people, the most shameful thing that they'll ever talk about. And so it can be really difficult for that information to come up in a conversation, like in a counseling setting. But having the answer to that information is extremely helpful in figuring out the path forward. Oftentimes, if I'm looking at porn and I can't stop by just saying, you know what, I don't want to do this. I know this isn't what God wants for me. This is not getting me what I'm actually wanting. This is creating a problem in my life. I'm just going to not do it anymore. If you can't just make that decision and walk away from it, then there's probably a much deeper thing driving it. And you have to figure out what that is. And that's probably going to take some professional help. There are some really good books out there that can help start to shine light and get some insight. My top recommendation is a book by Dr. Mark Laaser, Laaser, Mark Laaser. It's called Healing the Wounds of Sexual Addiction. If it is a male struggling with porn, that would be my top recommendation. If it is a female struggling with porn, there's a book called No Stones by Marnie Ferree, Ferree, Ferree. Full disclosure, Marnie is on the board of Ultimate Escape. I'm not plugging this because she's a board member. I'm plugging it because it is a great resource. But if it's a female with this struggle, that would be my first recommendation for a place to just get started in trying to figure all this out. We do have the DVD, Understanding Addictive Sexual Behaviors, that has the cycle we talked about tonight, and then a lot more information. That can be a helpful resource for just trying to get your brain wrapped around what does healing from this look like. Great question. That's the thimble version answer. But I'm sharing that I recognize that was a short answer to something that is a way bigger question than we can do justice in a 5-minute response.
The question that we heard before supper about the gap phone, are you familiar with that? Well, anybody's familiar with that type of phone? We just heard it.
I'm familiar with the concept of it, basically a safe smartphone that's limited to, maybe it only has the contacts that a parent would put in, or it can only, or it can't send or receive. I don't know what all the specifics are, but the concept of that, I am familiar with that, and certainly would recommend somebody considering that, or at minimum, putting some pretty good boundaries around phone use. An example of that would be a phone doesn't go into the bedroom at a certain time. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't do in the day things that are not healthy to do with a phone, but my experience in working with people is that oftentimes having a phone by the bed at night is a really prime temptation time. And so just it not being there, especially for teenagers, can be a really helpful boundary. I've worked with a number of clients who are in their late teens, early 20s, and that's a boundary that they have set for themselves as they hand off their phone to a friend or a roommate, or it goes in the kitchen, or it goes into a parent's bedroom. To have a 19-year-old who comes and says, hey, this is not safe for me, so Dad, I'm giving it to you. To me, that's a great step for a young adult to recognize, hey, I need help, and I'm not too embarrassed to let my parents just be the guardian of the phone at a time that I know would not be safe for me. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the church leadership for your vision for hosting this. I hope it's been helpful. Look forward to tomorrow. We'll have a Fun Theology of Sex Part 2. You can learn a lot about sex from a Tootsie Pop and a duck call. So we'll have some fun with that, and then Created for Relationship in the class time. No, sorry, which one? We're doing the theology section class and the Created for Relationship in the sermon time, I think. Okay. Alrighty, if you guys have questions, feel free to pick up the phone, give me a call. I have conversations on the phone. I don't engage in long texts. So if it's if it's a yes or no, you're welcome to shoot me a text and I'll say yes or no. If it's going to take more than a sentence or two, it's going to be a phone call. Okay.